Okay, last session of the day, then we can next door for some drinks and relaxation and a few awards. And well, thank you very much indeed for coming today. And we know how busy the MD is over this week, and we really appreciate this. If I just outline to the audience, your expertise, procurement, and not technology. So when we get to the Q&A later on, technology is not our forte, is it?
Well, so I am an engineer.
Oh, right. Sure.
I am an engineer. So somebody mentioned earlier that they did electrical engineering. So I did electronic and electrical engineering as a degree, but my career has taken me further and further away from being interested in flashy LEDs to what those flashy LEDs mean to our users. So.
Now, on the procurement side, with those titles, it sounds as though that you have budget to spend and...
I mean, it's fascinating that people think that it's interesting to hear about what I do as a job, but I've got about £4 to £5 billion of taxpayers' money to spend over the next 15 years in the ground segment for Skynet. So that's what I'm in charge of. So, everybody's interested now, aren't they?
They are, yeah. And can you break it down?
I've got money, unlike Henny.
Can you break it down into Sky, Spark stuff to...
Yeah, okay. So for those of you who don't know, Skynet is the military satellite communication system for the UK military. It's a sovereign-owned system. It's a closed network. It's a closed system. The total, so we are in the sixth epoch of it now, so Skynet 6, having exited from a 20-year, near 20-year PFI, private finance initiative with Airbus. So we're in the sixth iteration of it now. The total budget for that is about 7 billion. We only spend about 25-30% of that in space. So actually, the vast majority of the money we can spend, and we do spend, is on the ground, which is why strategies in satellite ground segment is really, really important. What we tend to do is invest in a constellation, which costs a lot of money, but once you've done that, the only thing you can do is spend money on the ground, because once they've gone up there, there's not a lot you can do with them. We don't generally send people out there with a spanner to add things on or change things. So that's why it's really relevant to be here today, I think. Yeah.
And, I mean, as you were saying, Skynet currently, would you say, is a disaggregated set of projects and exiting the 20-year PFI? And as a government department, would you say you are experiencing the growing pains of such a situation, or?
I think that would be an understatement. So we purposefully outsourced the provision of our entire satellite communications capability. It would be fair to say there are some guys in the room from Airbus today, I think. Oh yes, I can see Steve there, sitting there. It was brilliant. And it doesn't. People will say, there's all sorts of things wrong with it. It was brilliant. It was world leading for the last 18, 19 years. Genuinely, we were in a number of international forums where the US wanted it. Everybody wanted it. PFIs, so that way of procuring things in government, is very much out of vogue. We're not allowed to do that. It works very well for a satellite. It's a bit. As long as you know what you want for 15 years, it's a really good way of doing it. It's a really good way of spreading the cost. It's a really good way of not having really lumpy investment profiles, which governments really don't like. So it's a nice, smooth... It's like paying a mortgage on a house for 25 years. But if you can imagine, you don't always want to stay in the same house for 25 years. So there are some downsides to it, because you've bought a thing, and if you decide you want something subtly or fundamentally different halfway through, you're halfway through a mortgage and you've got to keep paying that mortgage. The result to the government, my part of the government, the MOD, was that we hemorrhaged all of our expertise and all of our knowledge. We used to own and operate and run and maintain it all ourselves. So the RAF used to do all of that for us. They all transferred into the commercial organisation that was running it for us, and they didn't come back. So having exited out of the PFI, we are now trying to learn how to buy, run, operate, maintain a very complicated, bespoke network again. And we're not very good at it yet. That would be fair to say. So growing pains, we're not growing very fast. I mean, anybody can read in the press. Civil servant numbers aren't growing. Military numbers aren't growing. So when we say we need another 300 people, the recruitment people say no. So we're not growing, but we're experiencing the pain of coming out of something which was brilliant, but now we're not allowed to do again.
Very good.
So yeah, I think we've got 13, 14 live, disaggregated, separate procurements for all of the elements of a military satellite network, and not very good at joining it together.
Okay, so the MOD's current solutions are a function of the level of detail that you set as requirements, which you said. Would it be correct to say that you are looking to move to a more outcome option?
Yeah, that's a very astute question. Yeah, so a really good comparison is to go and look at a commercial teleport or a ground station, and then look at ours, and they are chalk and cheese. And the reason they're chalk and cheese is a big load of legacy reasons. So there's some big things that we spent a lot of money on, and nobody else has, because they're X-band antennas, for example. There's not many of those around in the world. But also because when we write the requirements for Skynet 5, the previous epoch, we took what we knew from Skynet 4 and wrote it in a set of requirements. And so although there was some creativity and some innovation in there, actually the requirement said, what we want is, we've always had 4 people looking at that screen, so that if one of them goes to the toilet, or if one of them is ill, or if one of them's sleeping, there's always at least 2 or 3 people looking at that screen. So we wrote a requirement that said you will have a minimum of 4 people looking at that screen, as opposed to a requirement that should say, make sure the service doesn't stop, or make sure that when we need to command a spacecraft, that there's somebody there to command, or there's something there to command the spacecraft. And it would be fair to say that all of our the vast majority of our requirements are what we knew. We've exited from the PFI. We've done a tactical 5-year deal with led by Babcock, but that really took the requirements from Skynet 5 and lifted them into this, let's get out of the PFI. So they are now Skynet 4 requirements lifted into Skynet 5, lifted into Skynet 6. So we've created a legacy situation. So there's very little scope for even our suppliers to innovate, because we have requirements to say you shall do this, and it even describes how they should do it. Ridiculously, we say things like you must pick up the phone when they ring the help desk within 3 rings, or whatever that is. Nobody's measuring whether the user's actually happy with the help desk. We're just measuring how quickly the contractor picks up the phone and says, sorry, there's nobody here to answer your question. But they've met that KPI. So and I am exaggerating for effect, but not very much.
Okay. So, Emily, you're highly dependent on the market for SQEP, to deliver Skynet. For example, a hybrid network is a solution, not a requirement.
Yeah. So, because, as I mentioned earlier, we hemorrhaged all of our internal expertise. The expertise in delivering the sort of thing we need is very expensive. It's actually niche. It's also temporal. So if we're going to buy a spacecraft, that's not a good example in a ground segment strategy conference. But if we're going to buy a spacecraft, you need people who know how to specify a spacecraft for a short period of time. And if we buy a constellation that lasts for 10, 15, 20 years, you then don't need those people for another 10, 15, 20 years. And we have the same way if we buy some very bespoke terminals that go on all of our maritime platforms, so all of our frigates and destroyers and carriers and things. You need people who understand about that, and then you don't need them again. So actually we've got a real challenge that we don't think that expertise will ever organically sit within a government department. So we become heavily reliant on actually the market, because that's where the expertise sits, that's where the knowledge sits. Mm-hmm. So we have a real challenge about accessing that and accessing it at the right time, and also protecting it to make sure it's there that when we need it, we can actually get to it. And it sounds easy. We're in an international environment here, lots of people from all over the world. There are some things in Skynet that I can't tell anybody other than people who are very, very highly security cleared and are UK nationals, etc., etc. So it's not just protect a very generic part of experienced people, it's protect, in some cases, we need UK nationals who know about nuclear hardening, for example, and nuclear hardening on the ground, in space, and everywhere. So there's some real challenges. At the moment, we have what we call the Skynet Public Sector Support Contract, which buys in those suitably qualified and experienced people. But we're not allowed to commit for a long. So government procurement rules and all sorts of things mean we can only buy that for like 3 or 4 years at a time. So what we tend to do is invest loads and loads of knowledge and experience in a supplier of that SQEP, a consultancy or an advisor, and then we have to recompete it, and they all go away, and then we have to build it all up again, and then they go away and we build it all up again. So the bit that I'm leading on is trying to change that. So noting that there are some things that are tactical, some things that we need to buy. There is actually some things that we need longevity, we need consistency, we need coherency. And so the thing that I run, which is called SKIES, the Skynet Integrated Enterprise Solution, is trying to get us back to a position where there is somebody helping us for a protracted period of time, a longer period of time, and not tactical, not a bit more strategic. Yeah,
that's good. So what are the main operational capabilities that the system has to meet?
So if you think back to the broadband discussion or the presentation we just had, it's the exact opposite. So the most important thing is it needs to be there. Speed is nice, but actually the most important thing is that it's there. What's an example? So if we put Starlink onto a carrier, the ship's company would get used to having really low latency, really good Netflix into their bunk space on the carrier. The commanding officer gets used to having really low latency, high bandwidth applications, and moves from it being a welfare thing where it's Netflix to the bunks to using it for critical communications, and then when it's not there, because it won't be there I'm not sure it's contested or congested, but when there is somebody actively trying to make it not there for you, which we suffer from, and they're reliant on it, then that's no good. It needs to be, so it is actually the exact opposite. It must be there. So it's got to be robust, it's got to be resilient, it's got to be survivable in a whole heap of intentional threats that probably the commercial market don't see in the same way that we do. You would not have to Google very far, and I wouldn't do it because it's probably scary, but you would not have to Google very hard today to find out some 2 or 3 live threats that are facing Skynet today in the public domain. Now, if you can imagine in the classified secret domain about what we know is going on in space and on the ground, it's some scary stuff. But, we have special forces going behind enemy lines all the time, and they are tracked by people who are trying to stop them doing what they're trying to do. And it doesn't take very many pounds or dollars to buy a GPS jammer. And if you jam GPS and therefore then the satellite doesn't know where your terminal is, and that equally can be done in our ground stations in the UK. One last thing I suppose I'd say there is KA is great, loads of bandwidth, doesn't work very well when it rains. It's fine if you've got diversity in a ground segment, but you don't have diversity on a remote platform. You can't have a ship here and then a ship 200 kilometres away because it might rain on that ship. So KA doesn't work in a maritime environment very well. It's not something that can... So again, we have lots of challenges. Submarines are another good one. You know, they pop up and they want really fast comms for a short period of time so that they can go away again. They also don't want anybody to know they're there, so they don't want to be blasting up and saying, "Here I am, send me my latest, I don't know what you could, intelligence data, or who you want us to go and bomb or whatever." So there's some real sort of niche challenges but when it pops up, boy, it better be there.
That's good. So how is the ground segment playing its part in this rapidly changing environment?
So it's back to, that's the bit that can change. That's the bit that can track technology. If we go back to the geo is not dead. Geo is not dead. The reason geo is not dead for us is because many of the reasons I've just talked about. But if you think about those things are going to be there for 10, 15, 20 years. So the ground station is the thing where you can track technology, you can innovate, you can do some things to counter threats. So one of the things that we have to be is very, very agile and responsive to changes and requirements. Not very good at it. Actually, was really good in the PFI, because the PFI said, you've got to deliver that service. We don't care what goes on, you're being measured on delivering that service. So if they need to buy some sort of piece of equipment to go in the ground station to counter a threat, they go and buy it. Now, we have to go through government procurement governance to buy a thing that costs a few pounds. And sometimes it can take years to get approval to, in fact, I'm going straight from here to the minister to talk about something that we urgently need the minister to approve. And it's not very much money, but if we don't get that approved, Skynet is under some significant pressure. We don't seem to be able to escape that government. We're a government department spending taxpayers' money, and therefore it might only be £50,000, but that's £50,000 that's not building a school or a hospital and so it's all there's all sort of governance wrapped around that. So the ground segment is where you can react.
Yeah,
it's where you can track technology, but being a government department almost fights that agility and that flexibility.
So the slower to move.
We peak at glacial pace on a good day. I can't. I've been doing this for a long time. I can't remember many good days.
So global warming's your friend, yeah. I interviewed GovSat recently, and they were very critical of the ground segment. Not very critical, but
of our ground segment.
No, ground segment in general. Yeah.
Okay.
And their X-band, of course. Is that something you agree with? Do you think the ground segment has to catch up a bit, or?
So I don't think so. I think it's there. I mean, I've been sitting here fascinated by... This is the first time I've really engaged with this sort of community, and I'm fascinated about what is out there. And one of the things we suffer from is being too far away from the market.
Yeah.
It's not just that experienced people. We're a government department, so we hide away. I'm criticising my own team here, but we hide away. And analogy, forgive me for my analogy. We decide we want an iPhone, and we definitely decide we want an iPhone. Then we get loads and loads of very excited engineers to sort of reverse engineer an iPhone spec, and we write it down, and we spend years perfecting this reverse engineered spec for an iPhone 15. And then we go and get approval. But actually, we haven't described an iPhone 15 because what we say is, but we're the MOD, so we need it a bit bigger, and we need a bit faster, and we need another connector on it. And so we end up speccing an iPhone 15 and a half. We then spend 2 years getting approval to buy loads of them, and then we go to Apple and say, we like to buy loads of iPhones. And they say, oh, iPhone 15. Well, actually, it's iPhone 15 and a half. And Apple say, we're building the iPhone 18 now. We ain't building that. And so the technology is there. The solutions are there. The services are there. What we are not, and I think where Lux, GovSat or GovSat are right, is that government customers can't track it fast enough. And so we lag. We don't have a requirement for a hybrid network. We don't have a requirement for a multi-orbit, multi-band solution, because that's a solution, and that's the problem, I guess. But do I agree with them? I think they're deep inside our provision of this 5-year service contract now. But do I agree with them? I think looking at ours, yes. Looking at government's ability to track what's happening in the world-class, best-of-class teleports ground segment, yeah, they're probably right.
Yeah, okay. So how important is it to work with the commercial satellite providers, or not that important?
Oh, it's critical. So we're doing it now. We're doing it. I mean, about, I don't know what the percentage is, but it's something like 2/3 of what we do today is over commercial providers. So it's absolutely critical to what we do. Absolutely critical. So Skynet has a core coverage area. It doesn't go all the way around. We have some memorandums of understanding with various other friendly nations. So mainly the US, but with other friendly nations to cover some of the gaps. But if we go somewhere specific that isn't in that core coverage area, and they can't carry a big X-band antenna with them because they are special forces, for example. So we use commercial all the time. One of the things the special forces love about commercial is that they're hiding in plain sight, because they're just another person sitting on a commercial service. And if they've got hundreds of thousands of users, they're just one of 100,000. If you're sitting with a massive terminal mounted on a truck with its own generator, and you stand out like a sore thumb, and somebody can just drop something within a kilometre or two of you, and I don't mean explosive, I mean just a jammer that costs dollars to build or buy. So yeah, it's absolutely critical. One of the things we're trying to do, one of the things that we're trying to lean more into is getting that robust resilience, protection, so that the ability to potentially use our military waveforms, military cryptography. We want to help the commercial market to be able to make their offerings better with our support. One of the things I really dislike about how we do work is we buy things. We don't invest. We don't seed anything. We decide we're going to buy something, and then we buy it. And sometimes we have to pay loads of money because nobody builds it, so we have to pay for all the development. But we don't help the market to help us. So that's one of the things we're trying to change over the next 2 or 3 years is let's spend some money to make the commercial market close that gap from, a military and commercial, because there is a gap, but we can close it all the way. But we
can actual R&D or
yeah. So there's some existing services that with a little bit of investment, would shrink that gap significantly. So why shouldn't we do that rather than just saying, well, that's not good enough, we'll build something big and shiny and exciting and. No, is nobody here from the MOD who's going to fire me after this? Is there? Just because it sounds like doom and gloom, but to me the important thing here is that the Skynet program recognises this and it's trying to change it.
Yeah,
that's the important. I mean, I know we're not at the end yet, but there's my message for the end.
So in the operations, the importance of real-time data sharing, that's kind of.
Yeah, well, so data is critical, isn't it? I mean, and timing and latency, not measured in milliseconds, but sometimes, the data that we are moving around inside the Skynet network is target data. or intelligence data or whatever. And therefore, so we're not talking about milliseconds, but it's no good saying there was an enemy plane there 45 minutes ago, or there was, we need you to go here whilst it's dark, and then them saying, well, no, it's already light again now by the time you've told me. So real-time data is absolutely critical, but a lot of it, so it's back to this, somebody asked a question about UK cloud or cloud in the UK earlier. All of our data is in the UK. We don't let our data go, apart from when it's over our closed network, our data is in the UK.
So,
Or we hope it's in the UK. I can see people saying, no, it's not. But all of our intelligence, so the people who are, all of the analysts who are supporting that Special Forces deployed person are in the UK. So they need to get real-time data back and then very quickly get real-time data of that analysis back to them so that they can do whatever they need to do, run away, hide, shoot somebody. That's what we use it for. Is
All right, last question before I open it up to the audience. So if you're ready with some questions.
No, don't ask questions. We've got cocktails, Peter.
How important are standards among allies, interoperability, etc.? That's one of the interoperability is one of the buzzwords, isn't it?
Standards are really important, but we all have our own standards, which is the problem. So if you, I hate to use the example of building a spacecraft, but let's use it because it's easy. The UK has lots of ways that it controls how it builds spacecrafts and standards. The US, so we have all of our defense standards and building standards, and then the US has all of their own, and they're different. So making those two things interoperable, you're fighting standards, you're fighting the way that people write contracts, you're fighting the way that contracts are written, you're fighting all of those things. My customer quotes a thing called Own, Collaborate, Access, and I think it's obvious what that is, but own is we own it, access is we use somebody else's, collaborate is where we jointly put our money or our effort into building something that would be better than if we just built two things. And we don't do collaborate at all. So part of the reason why it's hard is because of standards, or there isn't international standards around. Cryptography is a really good example where the US and us use completely different standards. What's acceptable to them is very much not acceptable to us, and vice versa, for lots of different reasons. So we spend about, so Skynet traditionally spends about 85% of its budget on the own bit, and about 15% on the access, which is all the commercial services that we use. My customers say that's the wrong balance. We're spending 85% of our money, and that's only a third of the outcome that you're delivering, Pete. Because remember that 2/3 of what we do, we use commercial satellite. So my customer wants to turn that on its head and say we should be spending our money proportionally to how much we use and consume from each of those pots. But he also wants to collaborate, not just buy stuff from America, which is what we do. And the Americans buy stuff from us, but that's just access. So we have a thing called the Future Architectures Working Group, which is a Five Eyes, so the friendly nations and a few others on the side of it. And that is really trying to get into what is a sensible architecture for allied nations to have. Wouldn't it be really good if the US are building this? Why don't the UK build something which is complementary but different, so that when the two come together, it's much bigger than just having us all build the same thing? And that's what we tend to do. We all build the same thing. But then you're talking about two government, not just two government departments. It's hard enough in Whitehall trying to talk to business and trade or science and technology departments, but and the division between us and the UK Space Agency, don't underestimate how big that can become just because of politics. But now try and do it with the US DoD, for example, who their budgeting works differently, even their financial years don't align with ours. And so trying to get a joint investment program with another country is so challenging. It doesn't matter how many excited engineers sit in a room and say the thing we should do is, we've also got to fix all of the process and the governance that goes with it, which is probably what I spend most of my nights not sleeping thinking about.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Okay, do we have any questions from the audience?
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay. What's the takeaway for our audience in terms of Skynet, MOD, and what's...
Okay, so Skynet's got lots of money because it's a requirement that's not going away. The UK military needs access to beyond line of sight communications, and it's not going away. So Skynet 6 ends in 2041, but Skynet 7 kicks in 2041 and runs till 2056 or something, and then Skynet 8 is behind that from 2056. So this is not going away. I'd like you to take my cynicism, and it is slightly flippant cynicism, but slightly flippant cynicism. Take that away as the MOD recognises it needs to do different and it needs to do better. The way it wants to do that is to get closer to the likes of the people who are in this room, who have all of the ideas and the solutions and the creativity and the innovation and the agility and flexibility to do it, where we don't. And what we want to do is use some of that money to buy into that creativity, innovation, solutions, and let's make GovSat in a few years' time not be able to say the ground segment's a bit rubbish.
Yeah, that's good.
So there's some things coming out very soon. So I run a program called Skies. It is trying to address all of those problems. We are coming with some very targeted market engagement. So if you go to .gov.uk and just search for Skynet, you'll find the page, the Skies page. Go to that, register your interest, and then we're going to be calling people to participate in some stress testing of what we want to try and do over the coming months. So this is your in.
Yeah, in the door. Okay, thank you very much, Peter. Absolute pleasure. Could we have a big round of applause for